talk about the very disappointing decision that came from the court last week regarding our ongoing litigation with the school department and the Department of Education. It is critical for taxpayers, residents, families, business owners, and every member of the Providence community to know that there are going to be real consequences as a result of this ruling. And depending on the outcome of the final judgment that could come as early as tomorrow, we're going to have no choice but to have harmful cuts and potentially new taxes that are going to impact the very same children and families that the school department says that they're trying to help. I want to say clearly at the outset here, along with my colleagues from the City Council, that the students and families of Providence are our top priority, and we are trying to balance the interests of these families to understand that it's not just what happens at the school day, but throughout the day and throughout the year that affects their health and happiness and well-being. The decision that the court handed down puts the city's finances at risk, and we are going to have to make very difficult decisions in the days ahead. Effective this morning, Providence has implemented a hiring freeze, and we are pausing all discretionary spending in city departments. Over the last couple of days, we have been examining what programs, initiatives, and investments need to be paused or considered to be cut or canceled. As most folks know, we pass our budget in June and the budget year starts in July. Most of our budget is contractually bound, whether that be people or contracts. There is very little discretionary spending. My administration and the City Council has proven themselves time and time again as responsible fiscal stewards. We know how to balance tough budgets, and then we manage to them. Unexpected expense like this in the middle of the fiscal year is not easy to absorb. As a result, the eligible things that are on the table for cutting, the things that can be cut in November, as opposed to things that could have been accommodated in a budget and are now on the table, include eliminating all future grant programs for critical services like our libraries, our investments in nonviolence training, our housing support programs, and the programming in our parks. These are all not currently contractual and might very well be cut depending on the range of possible outcomes tomorrow. Summer learning, summer employment, our water parks are all on the table to be cut for this upcoming summer. These are the same children and families that the school department claims to prioritize. In addition to the hiring freeze, there is the very real potential of additional layoffs across the city of Providence. In order to achieve the amount of money that might be awarded by the courts, we are looking at reducing city services by things like furlough days. That could be as much as 1 day a week for the rest of the fiscal year. We save about $200,000 a day for a furlough. That means everyone who works for the city of Providence stays home and does not get paid. That family takes a pay cut. That family has financial risk. The city saves only about $200,000. We would need to furlough staff for the rest of the year. There are multiple public safety initiatives that we are not contractually bound to fulfill. For example, we provide additional police coverage for high-use commercial areas such as Broad Street. We pay for that with overtime. That would be cut. We provide additional police patrol in our downtown parks, including our amazing pedestrian bridge. That would be cut. There are community events that we do not have to do. PVD Fest, 4th of July, New Year's Eve, cut. And we will look at cutting or pausing all large capital construction projects, including school construction. Again, the same children and families that we're talking about here. This year alone, next year we're going to spend $5 million on debt service for school construction. That all would have to stop if the worst of the outcomes comes to fruition tomorrow. The only other way to pay for this judgment is through a tax increase. And that is also on the table. We will be seeking permission from the Rhode Island General Assembly for a mid-year tax increase to help pay for this judgment. Depending on what the balance is between cuts and new taxes, that is hundreds of extra dollars per year for Providence property taxpayers. I understand that students and families are frustrated. I understand that more kids are going to be here protesting later today. It breaks my heart to see these kids stressed out and scared with that fear instilled on them by their own school leaders. And I share their frustration. They shouldn't have to do that. And credit to the Providence City Council and my administration, we have offered the money to save their sports and their bus passes. But that offer has not been accepted. All of this is in the context of continued irresponsible spending from the school department. We all know that there was going to be a fiscal cliff when the federal COVID aid expired, and they did nothing to plan for it other than to send us the bill and expect that Providence taxpayers would foot that bill. As a reminder, the Providence City budget is approximately $600 million. $135 million of that goes directly to the school department, the single largest expenditure in our budget. Also, as a reminder, the state runs our schools. The state has a $14 billion budget and total control of our schools. And why this problem is being presented as exclusively a city problem remains outrageous to me, and I think to my colleagues as well. We would instill fiscal discipline. We would instill oversight and crack down on the wasteful spending and solve these problems together. When the previous mayor and the previous council agreed to this takeover, there was a belief that this would be cooperative, that we would work together. Instead, it is clear that the commissioner views her ability to run our schools as one without checks and balances. Cooperation is a one-way street with her. I've heard from community members who share that frustration, that they feel like there is no transparency. So I want to say loud and clear today that if in tomorrow's court hearing, and if the Department of Education is going to force us to raise taxes and cut critical funding and send yet another blank check to the Providence Public Schools, then it is time for us to get our schools back now. Enough is enough. I have a long history of knowing how to manage and balance tough budgets. This council has shown itself to be able to manage difficult finances and have fiscal responsibility. I am confident that we can give the appropriate fiscal oversight in conjunction with a brand new school board starting in January, that we can cut down on wasteful spending, that we can prioritize the things that impact students and families the most, and finally put an end to the madness. And so, depending on what the outcome is, Providence residents need to know that there are about to be dire consequences. And again, it's time to end the takeover. We need to add some fiscal discipline so that we're not continuing to simply send blank checks. At this point, I'd like to ask Council President Rachel Miller to say a few words, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Mayor Smiley. Look, as the legislative branch of government, our most fundamental obligation is to ensure transparent spending of public money. For many, many months now, both publicly and privately, to PPSD officials and publicly here, I have asked for a full accounting of the gaps in the PPSD budget so that City Council could work to allocate funding to stop harmful cuts to student-facing programs. The City Council has made its commitment clear, together with Mayor Smiley. We are committed to our schools, committed to our students, committed to addressing underfunding of public education that goes back decades. This commitment has been demonstrated well by a historic appropriation allocation to the school's budget this year. Earlier this year, in response to district's threats to cut certain programs like sports and bus passes, we immediately sprung into action, identifying money to avoid those painful cuts and promising to work to find more. We did this with the promise and hope of true partnership, right, in solving the deep-seated issues plaguing the district, asking that PPSD and RIDE come to the table in good faith. Instead of information about actual budget issues, actual student and community needs, we are facing a court-required dollar amount based on a rote percentage per an outdated Crowley Act, and may be forced into spending that no municipality could reasonably absorb in a single year. Our students, our families, our teachers have called on us repeatedly to come together, but RIDE has chosen an adversarial role. Instead of collaboration, we're being met with court action. And it's our same students, the same students and their families, city residents and taxpayers who pay that price. Providence families are already stretched thin. We are in the midst of a devastating housing crisis. Cost of living continues to rise. For RIDE to reach into the city's pockets to finance budget missteps at the expense of our capital city's residents is short-sighted and frankly appalling. RIDE has put our city in an impossible position. Providence students and families will suffer, whether in the form of cuts to crucial community programs and public safety or higher taxes at an already difficult time. Our community members will feel the effects of this decision deeply. The City Council will vet any proposed cuts to city services and programming. Will work together with Mayor Smiley to ensure that these cuts do the least amount of harm. But we are talking about an potentially astronomical, devastating amount of money in an already lean city budget. If RIDE had the best interests of students and their families at heart, they would be working with us to enumerate the exact amounts that students need to stop cuts to student-facing programming. They would not be threatening the financial stability of the city in which those same students and families live. We can't continue to allocate city funds to a state-controlled system that is not transparent, not accountable to the people of Providence, and consistently fails to deliver. Our city is not a bank for a state-controlled experiment. After 4 years, it has become abundantly clear the state takeover is not working to promote the collaboration and the transparent decision-making that our students need. Given the choices that RIDE is forcing on the city and its residents, I do not have the confidence that the takeover has the best and highest interests of our students at heart. I think it is time, for the best path forward is to return our schools to local control. As we await a final number from the court, one that could potentially devastate our city and residents, there's still time for us to be the grown-ups our young people desperately need us to be, have been asking us to be, to reach an outcome that doesn't place essential city services or essential student programs on the chopping block. But given what we are facing tomorrow and the likely outcome of that, I will be working closely with my colleagues on the City Council and with the mayor to chart a path forward that returns the schools to local control and that holds the best interests of every resident of the city to heart. Thank you.
Mayor, the city of Providence reached new heights just last week with municipal bond ratings. Does this type of chaos have the potential to start to unravel some of that progress?
It does. Depending on what actions would be taken, it does have the potential to affect the very long-term stability of the city. Some of the suggestions that have been, I don't know if they're serious or flippant or not, but the school department has said things like, just use the rainy day fund or use the medical reserve account, which to me only underscores their level of financial irresponsibility. The rainy day fund is for the entire city for true catastrophes like a pandemic or a recession. It's not something that you just dip into on a regular basis. And the medical reserve account includes their employees. That's if we have, which the teachers and classroom helpers, if we have a high-cost claim, someone with cancer, God forbid, or a premature baby that was born, we're self-insured. That's what that account is there for. That account is not there to fill in the gaps for when there's mismanagement and cost overruns. And so were we to start taking actions like they recommend, it would absolutely be noted by the ratings agencies. Now, we are a financially responsible organization and a body and a city, and so the proposals that I'm telling you we will take today are what difficult choices look like. This is what fiscally responsible people do. Even though none of us here want to raise taxes or cut vital expenses, that's what we will do because that's what we have to do.
Mayor, 2 questions.
Dan.
One, if you were to take back the school system, wouldn't you still owe the money based on the decision? That's 1. 2, are you going to appeal the decision in the Supreme Court?
Were we to be in control of the school department today, and this is something that we've said multiple times, particularly over the last couple of weeks as this has boiled to the top, is there are other tough choices that could be made that do not hurt children and families. For example, they've mismanaged nearly $1 million in utility costs. That doesn't hurt a single kid. We know we could help them do better. They love to, and I cannot, it is so frustrating to us, and if you can tell that we're emotional today, it's because 1, we know we could do better, and 2, it is just wrong what they are doing to our kids. I have little kids coming up to me saying, Mayor, don't cut my sports. And that is intentional. That is intentional that they put sports and bus passes on the top of the list. What's not on the list? High-cost administrators, multi-million-dollar consulting contracts. And so, yes, if we were in charge of the schools today, we would also have to make cuts. I don't deny that. But the cuts that we would prioritize would not be the ones that are freaking out middle school kids in our city.
But would you owe them money is what I'm saying? Because that's a different scenario.
The court case has to do with what the obligation is under the Crawley Act, which only pertains to districts that are under state control. So if we were no longer under the Crawley Act, the legal obligation would change. There may be some question about historical years, but that obligation will change. And more importantly, what I think is the bigger issue is the partnership that the previous mayor and previous council aspired to. And I will tell you, and I think it's fair to say that my colleagues up here, we weren't always on the same page. We have come to the same point today. I was one that was holding back and saying maybe we should really try to let the takeover work. It's not working. And the reason it's not working is because the potential for collaboration is non-existent. And collaboration also includes helping us solve difficult financial problems together, and that's not happening.
And the appeal, just on the appeal, sorry.
It will depend on the outcome of the case and the appeal. It is likely that we will appeal pending how the potential range of an award is quite large.
Can you give us
but it's important.
Is it as low as virtually nothing to 30 million? Is that the range?
No, we believe the actual potential range is 10 million to 85 million. But the mechanics of this are important, actually, regardless of appeal. The other related issue is the commissioner's ability to divert other state aid. So there was $8.5 million due to the city of Providence from the state for car tax reimbursement, having nothing to do with the city, with the schools. They succeeded on that. So they are in possession of that $8.5 million, or it's in escrow right now. They're about to be in possession of that $8.5 million. Even if we appeal, we now have an $8.5 million hole in our budget. And the city cannot absorb an $8.5 million reduction in anticipated revenue in the middle of the year with no changes. So we will have to make other cuts or other budget choices to absorb that cut, even if it's pending appeal.
Mayor, where are student, I should say teacher unions and related unions weighed in on this? Are they willing to offer any concessions, any furloughs, any cuts, any cost savings?
Excellent question. I've not heard of that, but the city council, the school board are not at the table with the PTU. This is to my point that we're being asked, as the council president says, to be a bank, but we are not, in fact, in any position of responsibility. And so the school department, PPSD and RIDE are negotiating with PTU on a new contract. We are not at that table. We don't know the nature of those conversations, and you would have to ask them.
Two-part question.
Please.
Mayor, you indicated that the high end of this range is upwards of $85 million.
Correct.
And do you anticipate that this could come at you all in one budget year? And all of the cuts and program reductions that you've outlined, is that even close to matching that figure?
We don't know what the nature of the schedule of payments would be, but I can tell you, just for sort of context, frame of reference, scale, a cut certainly of $85 million, but even of half of that couldn't be absorbed in a current budget year without extraordinary measures. Extraordinary measures like eliminate the entire Department of Recreation, eliminate, send the whole city workforce to a 4-day work week until June 30th, plus a tax increase, plus plus shut down our libraries, which get funded by us, which we could cut if we had to. This is a scale that we simply cannot absorb. We have, I think we all should be proud of the fact that we have funded 100% of our pension obligation now for many years. We are under a court judgment whereby we must fund at least 95%, and we're playing catch up. We're paying for the sins of the past in the pension. To your question around how does this impact our bond rating, perfect example. We could fund 95% instead of 100. That saves us $4.5 million. The scale of this award is so huge, it's incomprehensible to think about all of the things we would need to do at the high end of that range.
And should it come to a tax increase, a request for a tax increase?
Yes.
How do you determine that figure?
So as folks may know, all communities in Rhode Island are subject to a property tax cap, which is to say that taxes can go up 4% every year. In Providence, a 4% increase generates about $15 million of new revenue. Again, for context, if this award were $30 million, you're talking about 2 maximum tax increases. If we needed to raise $30 million in new taxes, owner-occupants would pay $330 a year in new taxes, and non-owner occupants would pay $580 per year in new taxes. Most of those are apartments, and we know that that tax increase will be passed along to renters.
Mayor, I'm going to have to ask the question, is bankruptcy on the table?
Bankruptcy is only available when the city cannot pay its bills. So in that respect, it's not, because what we would do are the things that we're talking about, which is we would raise taxes and we would cut expenses. The problem is we don't want to do any of these things. And all of these things are going to do is hurt the same children and families. This is what we're saying. This is someone's parent who's maybe already working 3 jobs is going to have an even harder time paying the rent. This is a working family who relies on summer programming, one for enrichment and education for their kids, but also for the kids to have something to do while they're at work. Cut. So we're hurting the same families. It is so reckless, and all in the midst of where there have been offers of collaboration, offers of new money that have not been accepted, in addition to a willingness to partner to find cuts that don't hurt kids.
Mayor, ahead of...
President, I know that there's a lot of ARPA money up for discussion tonight at the Council of Finance meeting. Would any of this ARPA money even make a dent, and how much is exactly left for the school to potentially take?
I think given the circumstances, it is wise for us to hold that ARPA conversation until we get a full understanding of what's happening in court and address it with the other council members and committee after that.
Ahead of tomorrow's court hearing, the judge did ask both parties to come together and discuss what dollar amount is in play here. So has that happened? Have you been able to narrow it down even a little bit?
We're prepared to present our brief tomorrow in court about what we think that number should be. We're putting final touches on that now. I assume the other party is doing the same. That will be ready for court tomorrow.
Hey, Mayor, this has the potential to be a recurring expense, not just a one-time 2024, 2025 fiscal expense. Correct?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It is our understanding that this additional funding would not just come into effect for this budget year, but then would be added to what we refer to as the base, the level appropriation amount that we would need to spend next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. And so this is not a one-time expense, and so the ramifications will be long-term.
We're talking about RIDE here, but what about, where does the governor play into this? I mean, don't they ultimately answer to him, the Department of the State?
Absolutely. They are a department of the state. The state runs our schools. The state is responsible for 71% of the Providence public school budget, and the state, as I have requested on multiple occasions, should be part of the solution. They are currently offering no additional monies, and actually in court documents that came out last week, there was actually a letter from the governor that said to an official at PPSD, the state has a deficit, go to the city of Providence to get the money.
Now, what do you think the appropriate number is? 135 million right now. What do you think the appropriate number that Providence should be giving the school district is?
It's hard for me to answer that question, Dan. We haven't been in charge of the school's finances for a long time. We know that as it pertains to the per pupil expenditure, we are making progress, and that is in large part due to our collaborative effort to increase school funding last year by an amount, the largest amount in 17 years. We know that as it pertains to other urban districts, Providence is in the middle of the pack in terms of how much local funds are matched with state funds to make up school spending. And so we are in the ballpark for an appropriate level of funding. And one of the issues that we've been disputing in the Crawley Act is how we calculate what the city's responsibility is. By our calculation, we are almost at where we should be, and we have offered to reach the point where we should be by our calculation. This gets a little complicated, but the Crawley Act, which is an antiquated law that has never been tested until now, is poorly written, and it says that when the state takes over a school district and it increases funding, the local district should increase funding as well. We get that. That's the partnership piece. What we understand and think is fair is that we should increase the funding at the level that the state increases the funding to Providence. They are arguing, the commissioner is insistent, that it is the increase in funding statewide. So for example, last year in fiscal 24, state funding to education went up 6.9%. The increase to Providence was only 1.8%. Why should the taxpayers of Providence have to increase its funding to compensate for increases in school funding in Barrington and East Greenwich and wherever else? This year in fiscal 25, the increase in state funding statewide was 6%. The increase to Providence was 4%. Again, they want us to pay for the increase that we're not seeing, that suburban and rural communities are seeing. I don't begrudge those other communities getting more money, but the taxpayers of Providence shouldn't have to pay for that increase to increases that are going somewhere else. And so it is hard to define what the right number is, but I look at these data points to figure out if we're close. In terms of other urban communities, we're in the middle of the pack. In terms of per pupil expenditure, we're getting close to where we should be, and we're making meaningful progress at a pace that we can absorb, that our taxpayers can absorb. And in terms of what's fair under the Crawley Act, we are very close to meeting the definition that is our understanding, which is as the increase to Providence increases, we increase at the same rate.
You were part of the administration that, just one more question.
Yeah.
You were part of the administration that led him to take over.
Yes.
And honestly, do you regret it?
It's sort of like I said earlier. Were we to have been able to achieve a real partnership, I think it had real potential. At the time, that was our belief. Whether it's change in leadership or that turned out to be a false assumption, it's sort of irrelevant. Either way, it has turned out that partnership is actually not part of this turnaround effort. And it really became clear to us over the summer, and I don't want to speak for anyone. It became clear to me over the summer, and then there have been multiple attempts to try to save this relationship. And since the beginning of the school year, it has been strained to the point of almost non-existent.
Mayor, has the
You
General
mentioned
Assembly...
that a school takeover is something that you want to take over back to schools, that could be a solution. But
can you? Because isn't the commissioner the one responsible for?
Yeah, so I think there's two paths forward on this. One is the commissioner and the Board of Education, to whom she reports, could vote to wrap it up earlier. You know, they've already voted once, but there's nothing to say they couldn't vote again. And it's important to note that the vote that they took back in September said up to 3 years. Didn't say 3 years. So I'm actually not even entirely sure it requires a second vote. Or the legislature, through legislative action, could short circuit that process and just bring it to a close.
Mayor, has the Rhode Island Providence delegation to the General Assembly and Senate weighed in yet in terms of Office of Help or Office of Cooperation or support?
We briefed members of the Providence delegation on Friday to make sure that they understood both the ramifications of this ruling, the potential cuts, because these are their constituents also, and that we would be seeking their permission for a mid-year tax increase.
To play devil's advocate for a minute, when you talk about the Crawley Act, you're talking about what you believe is fair, but what's fair and what's legal aren't always the same thing. And on Friday, the judge had some pretty strong words saying, he was deeply bothered that the city didn't do a good job of prevailing on the merits. So is this something that maybe the city should have just planned better for?
I think you're absolutely right that there's a question between what's legal and what's fair. And that's why we continue to be so upset, I think is the right word, because it shouldn't be what one judge's interpretation of a state law is. It should be what's best for these kids and their families. And so based upon RIDE's obsession, insistent on one reading of this legislation, they're going to hurt their kids just a different way. And if we actually were putting children and their families first, we could do what's best for them. I've heard, and I'm sure my colleagues from the City Council have heard the same thing, time and time again, from teachers and classroom assistants and bus monitors and principals and assistant principals about the struggles today more than ever of being an educator, about all of the other challenges that our students are facing, sometimes rooted outside of the classroom. We're going to make those things so much worse by all these cuts. And so if we actually cared about kids and started the conversation there, we would come to an understanding, which we have offered time and time and time again. It's not going to help the social and emotional needs of our kids to have no after-school and summer programming. It's not going to help the financial strain of families in our cities for their taxes to go up and summer school to get cut and the water parks to be closed and the libraries to go down to 2 days a week. None of these things are going to help these families and these kids. And so one judge and one commissioner interprets the law one way. We think that that's wrong and unfair.
So is this the worst case scenario for you?
The ruling is very disappointing. The range of whatever the award might be is massive and could be catastrophic. If it is the high end of the range, that is truly worst case scenario. This is financial health of the city for a very long time to come. And so today is about two things: making sure that our residents, our taxpayers, understand what might be coming, and two, to say enough is enough. If we're going to be forced to send a blank check, we want some oversight and financial control over this district.
What about the need for the PPSD? I was just wondering, could you elaborate on why that is important and what you expect the results of the audit?
I'm sorry, the first part of the question, I spoke of what?
The need for an audit of the PPSD's finances.
Yeah. We have all received financial presentations from school officials where we have observed numbers change. It's hard to get a straight answer. We get different answers. And so there's a decided lack of confidence in their ability to budget and to even understanding the scope of the problem. Two, we know that there have been instances of waste and
Like what?
like, for example, their electrical bills. $800,000 in their gas bill, that they paid $800,000 more than they needed to because they didn't opt into the right rate for their school buildings. $800,000. This isn't a trivial thing. There are other instances like that as well. In addition to then just to the audit question about choices. We know there's going to need to be tough choices made. We know that. But since the takeover, central office expenses have gone up 220%. 220%. That's not teachers, that's not social workers, that's central office workers. We know that last year, because of a recalculation of the number of students by formula, they picked up an extra $8 million in new state aid. That's great. They knew they had a deficit. And yet, when they got that $8 million of extra money, what did? They added $8 million worth of expenses, as opposed to use it to close a budget gap. So they're making choices regularly that are not financially responsible, that are not acknowledging where they are as a district, and that I think are the wrong choices. That's the kind of things that an audit would help us understand, would help us uncover, and would help us move forward in a more responsible way that doesn't have to use students as pawns and lobbyists on behalf of their own irresponsible decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Do you guys want to come? If you guys want to come in the back with me for a second, you can. If you need to go, that's fine too. Thanks.